Next is Deputy Denise Mitchell has 10 minutes.
I'd like to welcome this bill before the House tonight. This is a bill that in many ways has been a long time coming, given the high-profile case from which much of the flaws and gaps in this area of legislation arise. Sinn Féin will be supporting the bill through the various stages, and we hope to see its swift passage through the process required. I understand this bill comes on the back of the 2015 Law Reform Commission report on a case which saw an individual jailed for killing his wife. Under the right of survivorship, this person was entitled to 100% share of the property. It's a bizarre loophole which sees an offender benefit financially from his crime or her crime. Under the Succession Act 1965, a person may not inherit any part of the estate of a person whom he or she has murdered, attempted to murder, or killed in circumstances amounting to manslaughter. However, because property held in a joint tenancy does not form part of the estate of a deceased person, the rule in the Succession Act 1965 does not apply. This bill before us today seeks to close this loophole and help prevent a repeat of such incidents in the future. It's in the report the Law Reform Commission recommended that major reform of legislation is required to ensure no person benefits from his or her own wrongdoing, especially in cases of homicide. I think that almost everybody will agree that this reform is common sense, and I'm glad to see Deputy O'Callaghan has brought this bill before the House. The Law Reform Commission also recommends that in any court proceedings, the court will, other than in exceptional circumstances, order that the costs of the proceedings are to be paid by the offender. This is because such cases only arise because of a wrongful act of the offender. This recommendation is in the bill before us, and this is to be welcomed. I had got many questions to ask Deputy O'Callaghan on Part 46E, but Deputy O'Callaghan has already clarified that this evening. So to conclude, I'd like to welcome the bill, to support the bill, and hopefully this bill passes without any delays.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this very important bill. First of all, I would like to commend my colleague Deputy Jim O'Callaghan for bringing forward this bill to address a loophole in current legislation in order to ensure that no perpetrator of murder or manslaughter can financially benefit from their victim's death. Despite the passage of more than 3 years since recommendations were made by the Law Reform Commission calling for legislative reform of the nature envisaged by the bill, unfortunately, we haven't seen action to date. This bill was introduced some 19 months ago, and I believe it's high time that we are here tonight discussing it. The issue initially came to the fore back in 2008, following the manslaughter of a woman by her husband in Howth, County Dublin. Despite being found guilty of this serious crime, the perpetrator stood to inherit substantial amounts from his wife's estate. This resulted in legitimate public outrage when it became apparent that under our law, the killer of a spouse could legally inherit the deceased's assets. Many spouses co-own property by way of a joint tenancy. The law at present means that when one spouse dies, even if his or her death is as a result of being killed by the other, ownership of the property automatically transfers to the surviving co-owner. Following litigation arising from this unlawful killing, the High Court recommended that the law in this area should be reviewed. The Law Reform Commission subsequently published its recommendations and proposed legislation in 2015. Legislative reform is needed to ensure that the principles that 1. A person should be prevented from benefiting from his or her wrongdoing, and that 2. no cause of action should arise from one's own wrongful act are applied, not only under succession law, but also to prevent an offender benefiting in any other context. This bill seeks to achieve that aim, and I would just like to say I welcome the fact that the government will not oppose the bill at second stage. I welcome the support from Sinn Féin. I think anybody who would step back and look at this can realise that there is an anomaly here and it needs to be corrected. Gorv Mahagut.
Thank you very much. And Minister of State, you have the next lot, and the mover of the debate will reply.
Brief, Look, I just acknowledge that the contribution from all members here. Perhaps in another time slot, this would have generated more discourse, but it certainly deserves to be seriously considered. I think, Deputy Butler, you mentioned the public outrage and the impact this has had on society, but also the courage, I think, needs to be acknowledged of families of the deceased and the victims, who will see this as testament to their suffering, that they've actually pursued and persisted. And in fairness, there was no deliberate attempt on any side, even from the drafting people, to try to delay this, but it is timely. That said, I think we have to be mindful, as Deputy O'Callaghan said, this is a very fine piece of legislation that was introduced 57 years ago, and that we are tweaking it, and he even acknowledged himself he was cautious about doing it. So if we are going to be cautious about doing it, we should just make sure that we get it right, and I think we'll get agreement. So I'd be very surprised if we have any opposition if we can make sure that at committee stage we can iron out and clarify some of those finer points that need to be examined further. Thank you, Cathaoirleach.